Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for another Breakfast with Blaha. And today I'm having steak, brown rice, and broccoli. Breakfast of champions. All right, let's talk about something that I've covered in the past a few times, but I actually get clients who ask this, so that means I clearly haven't covered it enough times. And that is, why do some people deadlift so much more than they squat? And why is the squat closer for other people? Now, at first, some people will go, well, it makes sense. There's less joint angle involvement. We're usually stronger at the lockout. There's less knee bend. But it doesn't fully explain it because you're only looking at the quads, right? The back itself has to do a lot more work. It's harder on the back to deadlift. But again, that is a valid point that the partial nature of the exercise can contribute to the deadlift being easier, particularly for longer limbed lifters. But for average height people and shorter people, there's no leverage advantage there. It's not quite the same, right? It's not really the same thing as in terms of the knee bend and everything else to the same extreme. So one of the things that you're going to notice, and there's a few reasons why. When you start out lifting, your deadlift goes up faster than your squat, right? It goes up faster than your squat. Now you'll get people who will say silly things like, well, on novice programs, doesn't that mean we should run a different progression? No. And anyone who says that doesn't understand novice linear progression. They don't actually understand it. They have clearly never run it for 6 months. You know for a fact they haven't when they make that statement. They couldn't have. So, that aside, deadlift goes up quicker. And there's a few reasons for this. Number one, again, the leverage difference. It is slightly easier from a leverage perspective. Number two, it just requires less overall muscle gain to get good at a deadlift. Sure, your back and everything, but realistically, your legs can grow a little slower and your deadlift's going to go up. Building leg muscle, real leg muscle, takes time. And by legs, I don't mean quads. Notice I said legs. I mean the whole lower body. As quads are not necessarily the strongest primary mover. They're an important primary mover. They're number 3. We mean adductors, we mean glutes. And then quads, probably in that order of importance. But leg muscle builds a little slower, right? Our backs seem to adapt a little bit quicker, number one. But it does have to do with just low rates of muscle growth, meaning gaining a certain amount of muscle in the body doesn't seem to give you as many pounds always on the deadlift. Number two, most people who, when they start out lifting, are not starting at a high body fat or a high body weight. Usually starting at a lighter body weight. People are either cutting, right? They're either cutting, or they're not at a high body weight and then they bulk. Now, people who are cutting don't always see this same advantage, do they? That guys who are cutting oftentimes see a squat almost as good as a deadlift, real quick. And then the gap changes a little bit as they lose weight. So what do we see here? What are the factors? All right, number one, leverages. People who have long limbs are just going to be better at the deadlift. They are. And you're never going to change that. All the best deadlifters in the world, the top pullers, tend to have long arms, long legs. You want to see extreme examples. Extreme examples, look at Kaler Woollum or look at Thor, right? Kaler having hit just insane deadlifts, both conventional and sumo, like in the 220, and then Thor having, the uncontested strongest deadlift, in strongman, of course, different rules, strongest deadlift in history. Long arms, long legs. They have an advantage. Number 2, training age. The more muscle you gain and the thicker you get, the smaller the gap between the two. The squat goes up quicker. Number 3, body fat. Lean guys tend to deadlift more effectively. Fat guys squat more effectively. So, what are we looking at as ratios? Well, most people, the first few years training, you're going to be at about 80%. Meaning, on average, you can take their deadlift, right, multiply it times 80%. It's going to be roughly what their squat's going to be. That's normal. Usually the first few years of training. And if you look at what do we consider to be baseline strength? 400 squat, 500 deadlift. That's baseline strength. You've got a good strength base. That's exactly the 80% ratio. But notice we give that for people at a healthy body fat, a good body composition. Matters. Now, you'll get other people. I've had clients who have a dramatic difference, though. It's bigger than that. I've had clients who hit a 5-plate deadlift way before they hit a 4-plate squat. They're leaner with long limbs, long arms, long legs. So we come back over to that. That difference matters. Difference matters. As you train longer, the gap gets smaller. And when we start seeing it, a lot of really advanced lifters who do not have a leverage advantage towards the deadlift, you start seeing 90%. By very advanced lifters, I don't mean you've been training 4 years either. Talking serious lifters who push their squat hard, build big legs, who've been training a decade or longer. You start seeing closer to 90%. And then, of course, if guys who've been training a long time get fat, their squat can pass their deadlift. Think of Ray Williams. So why is that? Well, we come back over to the muscle. If you're fatter, you can hold more muscle, more body weight. Studies have found that when they looked at the big 3 and the way they were correlated to body weight, bench press was the most correlated to body weight, then squat, then deadlift. Right? Body weight doesn't seem to matter as much for the deadlift, but it's also because fat doesn't give an advantage. Fat actually gets in your way on the deadlift. It can cause you to use mechanics that make it more difficult. They can put you at a leverage disadvantage having a little bit of a gut. But when you squat, you can use that for a leverage advantage. In other words, extra body fat gives you squish at the bottom to bounce off of. Okay, that can improve your squat. So as someone gets fatter and fatter and fatter, that ratio will close quicker, and then sometimes their squat will overtake their deadlift. Now, I do want to note an exception. When equipment is involved, this changes. We're talking about purely raw, and when I say raw, I mean raw without wraps. Okay, because when we start adding wraps, not uncommon for guys squat to pass their deadlift. We start adding a suit on top of that, squat and deadlift suit, it can be hundreds of pounds. It can be 200 pounds more on their squat. It happens. So I'm talking purely about raw lifting without any equipment to help lift it. All right? We don't mean supportive stuff. We mean stuff that adds external energy. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.